They didn't announce it. They didn't brief the press. They didn't issue a palace statement. But somewhere inside the machinery of the British monarchy, a decision was made that may have permanently altered Prince Harry's life. And if you think this is just another royal rumor, let me ask you something directly. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if the most dangerous moment for Prince Harry didn't come when he left the royal family, but when the royal family quietly stopped protecting him? Because according to mounting evidence, legal documents, and a series of coordinated silences, Prince William and Princess Anne have confirmed something shocking behind closed doors. Prince Harry's royal security privileges weren't just reduced. They weren't paused. They weren't temporarily reviewed. They were quietly revoked, possibly forever. And the most unsettling part? Harry may not have fully realized it until it was already too late. This story is not about ego. It's not about tabloid drama. It's not even really about money. It's about power, belonging, and what happens when the institution that raised you decides you are no longer its responsibility. Because in the monarchy, security isn't just protection. It's status. It's legitimacy. It's a signal to the world that you matter. So when that protection disappears, the message is louder than any press release. But before we get to how this decision was made, before we talk about Prince William, Princess Anne, and the private conversations the public never heard, we need to understand something crucial. Prince Harry's relationship with security didn't begin when he became an adult. It began the moment he was born. From the second he entered the world, Harry was surrounded by armed officers, coordinated routes, threat assessments, and contingency plans. Not because he asked for it, not because he demanded it, but because the crown decided his life was worth protecting at all costs. And that decision shaped everything. Harry grew up in a world where danger was real, but managed, where threats existed, but someone else handled them, where fear was controlled by protocols, radios, and men trained to step in front of bullets if necessary. Then, when Harry was just 12 years old, that sense of safety shattered forever. Princess Diana died in a car crash that involved paparazzi, pursuit, and catastrophic failure of protection. That moment did something to Harry that no royal title could undo. It embedded a fear, a vigilance, a belief that security isn't optional, it's survival. And that belief followed him into adulthood, into military service, into public life, and eventually into exile. So when people casually say, well, he chose to leave, they often miss the point. Leaving the royal family did not mean leaving the risks behind. In many ways, it magnified them. Harry is still one of the most recognizable men on the planet. He is still tied to global politics, media obsession, and extremist narratives. He is still the son of a king, the brother of a future king, and a lightning rod for both admiration and hate. Only now, he stands outside the walls. And walls matter. Which brings us to why this story matters right now. Not last year. Not 5 years ago. Now. Because over the past few months, something has shifted. Legal language has hardened. Palace silence has grown heavier. And behind the scenes, insiders describe a tone that is no longer conflicted, but resolved. The monarchy is not debating Prince Harry anymore. It has categorized him. And in royal terms, that may be the most final act of all. Here's what makes this moment so different from everything that came before. When Harry and Meghan first stepped back, the narrative was framed as temporary, flexible, evolving. Words like transitional period were used. Review after 12 months. Case by case. Those words gave the impression that nothing was set in stone. That reconciliation was possible. That protections could be restored. That bridges were bruised, but not burned. But power rarely announces itself when it's confident. It goes quiet. And that's exactly what happened with Harry's security. There was no dramatic revocation. No televised announcement. No clear line in the sand. Instead, there were small changes. Reduced coverage here. Different classifications there. A shift in who paid. A shift in who decided. Until one day, Harry found himself doing something that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. He was suing the very institution that raised him. To protect him from threats it once took responsibility for without question. Let that sink in. A prince of the United Kingdom standing in a courtroom, arguing that his life is in danger, and being told, effectively, that it's no longer the crown's problem. And this is where Prince William and Princess Anne enter the story in a way the public hasn't fully confronted. Because while King Charles is the monarchy itself does not operate on emotion. It operates on committees, advisors, precedent, and increasingly, on the influence of senior working royals whose priority is not family harmony, but institutional survival. Prince William is no longer just a brother. He is the future of the crown. Every decision that crosses his desk is filtered through one question. What strengthens the monarchy and what weakens it? Princess Anne, meanwhile, has long been known as the enforcer. She does not do sentiment. She does not indulge drama. She believes in duty, clarity, and consequences. And when people like that stop debating and start agreeing, things move quickly. But none of this happened in public. It happened quietly, which is why so many people missed it. The revocation of security didn't arrive with a headline. It arrived with silence. Silence from the palace. Silence from officials. Silence that forced Harry into legal battles just to find out what protections, if any, he still had. And what those legal battles revealed was chilling, because they didn't just show that Harry's security had been downgraded. They suggested it had been fundamentally redefined, not as a right, not as an obligation, but as a privilege that could be withdrawn. And once something becomes a privilege, it can be taken away permanently. So ask yourself this. If Prince Harry's security is gone, and no one is rushing to correct the record, what does that tell you about the monarchy's intentions? Does it feel temporary to you? Or does it feel final? Because here's the contradiction that sits at the heart of this story. The royal family insists Harry is still loved, still family, still welcome. But love without protection is a strange thing in a world of real threats. And welcome without safety is just symbolism. The truth is, the monarchy has always drawn a line between family and function. And Harry crossed that line the moment he stopped being useful to the institution as it currently defines itself. That doesn't mean the decision was cruel. It means it was calculated. And calculations don't reverse easily, especially when they involve money, precedent, and power. So as we begin this story, keep one thing in mind. This is not about whether you sympathize with Prince Harry. It's not about whether you agree with his choices. It's not even about whether you like him. It's about what happens when the crown decides someone is no longer inside the circle of protection. Because once you're out, getting back in may be impossible. And the next question is unavoidable. If this decision was truly confirmed, who pushed for it the hardest? And why now? Because the path to this moment didn't begin with Harry. It began long before, with a childhood shaped by protection and a future that would slowly, quietly strip it away. The protection didn't just surround Prince Harry. It defined him. And that's something most people never fully understand. Because when we talk about royal security, we tend to reduce it to cars, bodyguards, flashing lights, and men in dark suits. But for Prince Harry, security was never just a logistical arrangement. It was a psychological constant, a silent presence that shaped how he walked, how he spoke, how he perceived danger, and how safe he believed the world could be. So here's a shocking question to start us off. What if the thing Prince Harry lost wasn't simply protection, but the very structure that allowed him to function without fear? From the moment he was born, Harry lived inside a system designed to anticipate threats before they appeared. His routes were planned. His environments controlled. His exposure managed. There were people whose entire job was to think about the worst-case scenario, so he didn't have to. And when you grow up like that, safety stops feeling like a luxury. It feels like a promise the crown makes to its own. Harry didn't earn that promise. He inherited it, along with the title, the expectations, and the invisible target that came with being a royal in the modern age. As a child, Harry was not taught to scan crowds. He wasn't taught to worry about who was watching him or why. Someone else handled that. Someone always stood between him and danger. Until one day they didn't. Princess Diana's death was not just a personal tragedy. It was a seismic rupture in the idea of royal protection itself. For the public, it was heartbreak. For Harry, it was a lesson burned into his nervous system. Protection can fail, silence can kill, and cameras can be dangerous. Imagine being 12 years old and learning that lesson in the most brutal way possible. Harry didn't just lose his mother. He lost the illusion that protection was infallible. And yet, paradoxically, security became even more central to his life after that moment. Not because it felt comforting, but because it felt necessary. From that point forward, Harry grew up hyper-aware of risk, exposure, and vulnerability. Even when the guards were there, the fear lingered. The idea that danger doesn't announce itself, that it arrives suddenly, that it doesn't care who you are. This is where Harry's story begins to diverge from the public narrative. Because while people often paint him as reckless, impulsive, or entitled, those close to him have long described something else underneath. A man shaped by loss, driven by anxiety, obsessed with control in a world that once spiraled out of it completely. When Harry joined the military, it wasn't just about service. It was about agency. For the first time, he stepped into a role where risk was acknowledged openly, where danger was named, trained for, and confronted head-on. Ironically, it was the one place where his fear made sense. But even there, security followed him. His deployments were controversial precisely because of who he was. The military had to balance operational integrity with the reality that Harry was a high-value target. His presence increased risk for everyone around him. That's important to remember. Harry didn't just need protection because he was paranoid. He needed it because his identity amplified danger. And that didn't stop when he left the army. If anything, it intensified. As an adult royal, Harry represented something potent. Youth, popularity, rebellion within tradition. He was relatable in a way the monarchy rarely allows itself to be. And that made him both beloved and vulnerable. Crowds adored him. The press chased him. And threats followed quietly in the background. This is where royal security becomes more than a shield. It becomes a signal. When the crown assigns full protection to someone, it's telling the world, this person matters. This person is defended. This person is not expendable. Security is hierarchy made visible. And for decades, Harry sat high within that hierarchy. Until suddenly he didn't. But let's not rush ahead. Because before the fall, there was absolute certainty. Harry believed, deeply and sincerely, that no matter what happened, arguments, scandals, disagreements, the crown would never abandon its duty to keep him safe. That belief was reinforced again and again, even when tensions rose, even when relationships strained, even when Harry began pushing against royal norms. Security remained constant, which is why what came later felt like betrayal rather than bureaucracy. You see, royal protection isn't automatically removed when someone steps back. There are layers, categories, gradations. Former royals, extended family members, and even some non-working figures retain certain protections based on threat levels, symbolism, and precedent. And Harry had all three working in his favor. He was high profile, he was controversial, and he was globally recognizable. In other words, if anyone still qualified for protection after stepping away, it was him. So when coverage began to quietly change, it wasn't immediately obvious. At first, it felt like adjustment. Different teams, different jurisdictions, different logistics. But beneath those changes was something more fundamental. A shift in philosophy. The monarchy was no longer asking, how do we protect Harry? It was asking, why should we? That question alone tells you everything. Because once an institution starts questioning obligation instead of execution, the outcome is rarely temporary. And Harry sensed it. That's the part people underestimate. This wasn't a man oblivious to what was happening around him. This was someone trained by trauma to notice subtle changes in safety. When routes changed, when protocols loosened, when decision-making authority shifted away from the palace. Each change sent a message. You are no longer central. And that message landed hard. Especially for someone whose entire life had been structured around the assumption of protection. Think about it. Most people grow up learning how to protect themselves. Harry grew up learning that someone else always would. When that belief collapses, it doesn't just create logistical problems. It creates identity shock. Who are you if the system that defined you no longer claims responsibility for your safety? Are you still a prince? Or just a public figure with a famous name and no shield? This is why Harry fought so hard legally. Not because he wanted special treatment, but because, from his perspective, something sacred had been broken. A promise had been quietly withdrawn, and no one was explaining why. The courts didn't see it that way. They saw categories, policies, budgets, procedures. But Harry saw something else. A door closing. And once that door closed, it didn't just separate him from protection. It separated him from belonging. This chapter isn't about blame. It's about context. Because to understand why the revocation of security feels so final, so devastating, you have to understand how deeply security was woven into Harry's sense of self. It wasn't an accessory. It was infrastructure. Remove it, and everything above it becomes unstable. Which brings us to the next turning point. Because if security defined Harry's place within the royal hierarchy, then the moment he stopped being a working royal wasn't just symbolic. It was structural, and the decision that followed didn't just change how he was protected. It changed whether he was protected at all.